Hi, I'm Joe Navarro, and when it comes to poker, one thing is perfectly clear to me and to every other expert, and that is that poker is about observation. Now, one of the things that we definitely know is that we can all improve our ability to observe and to decode human behavior. Now, you've heard about nonverbal communications, body language, and tells. It's really all the same thing. So I'm going to use these terms interchangeably here, but we're really talking about tells. What is it that we're observing that the body is communicating that we can use to tell us what the person is thinking, feeling, or intending? Now, when it comes to observation, we have to be very careful how we observe. And by that I mean, you can't intrusively observe. If you stare at someone, if you look directly at them, that sometimes affects how the observation, how their behavior is going to turn out. So one of the things that we're going to focus on is how to observe carefully so that we don't intrude onto other people, so that we don't challenge them while we're staring and while we're observing. Your success really is going to be measured by your ability to observe. And those observations have to be made in context. Just as in an airport you expect to see people who are stressed, well, there's going to be times at the poker table when someone may be stressed, for instance, after they've received a phone call, or they've done something that they don't feel very good about. Observation coupled with context makes for a better observer. Now, the other thing that we can capitalize on is the ineptness of other players who haven't taken part in this instruction on their poor ability to observe. And we know that most players haven't been taught how to observe, don't know what to look for, or are very limited in the things that they look for. For instance, they may only look at the face. The other thing we want to think about is the reliability of your observations. If you have to think about what you saw, it may be too late. We want to build the ability to look at a behavior. For instance, you see lip pursing. The person goes like this. And not have to think, did I just see that? What does it mean? What happened just before? So we want to incorporate observation with context of what's happening at the table, and then we want to build in some sort of reliability so that we're not questioning ourselves, because that's going to hurt you as a poker player. And the other thing we find with, especially with poker players, is this, that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So a lot of the tells that we see, for instance, when people get together and a table is first formed, those behaviors we're going to see later on. And we can capitalize on these things because we don't have house behaviors or house tells. We don't have business tells, and then we have poker tells. Most of the tells, except for the ones that deal with the cards or the chips, most of the tells that you'll see at the poker table, you'll see outside the poker room. Hi, I'm Joe Navarro. And when it comes to poker tells, there's something that you can do even before you sit down at the table. Begin to observe the people that you're going to be playing against. You can pick up a lot of tells before the game begins. You can pick up a lot of tells when you're not in the game. You can pick up a lot of tells just from casual conversation, looking across at another table, or just as the table is being formed. Many of the tells that we're going to be seeing in the future, we're seeing in the present. As I've said in other occasions, there are no poker tells, house tells, interpersonal tells, business tells. Most of our tells we use every day. Signs of comfort, signs of discomfort, which is critical to poker, are present as the table is being formed. And what you'll see is as people sit down and adjust their seats and they put their drinks down and do several other things to make themselves adjusted, they'll be revealing things. They may be pursing their lips, they may be compressing their lips, touching their necks, rubbing their hands, and so forth. These help to relieve stress. These are great opportunities to collect poker tell intelligence. This is what the professional poker players do. They use every opportunity granted to them to collect information. Yes, they review videotapes. A lot of players are on YouTube. You can see a lot of their poker tells and so forth. Sometimes they'll walk around and watch various games going on. They're collecting information. They're going to be rewarded in the future by collecting this information, because then they'll know, oh, so-and-so does this, so-and-so does that when they're strong, when they're weak, and they're marginal. You want to be able to observe without being noticed that you're observing. And what is it that we're looking for? Well, we look for several things, but the most important thing is comfort and discomfort. This is primary. This is essential. This is key to understanding poker tells. Because at any one time, we reveal whether we're comfortable or uncomfortable. My name's Joe Navarro. And when it comes to poker tells, it's really about observation. How well we observe them, how well we interpret them, how well we put them to use. Now, there's times when you're not going to be able to read someone. You're just not going to be able to pick up tells. There's just something, maybe you were distracted, maybe you didn't see something that was probably there, but you didn't notice it. In those circumstances, don't invent a tell. Don't say, oh, I think she did this or he did that. I've seen too many poker players invent a tell that never even existed. If you didn't see it, if you're not sure, then just go with betting patterns. Go with statistics. Go with probability, but don't invent a tell. Many of you are familiar with facial tells. You've looked at various books, magazines, and so forth, and they talk about reading the face and the eyes and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that there are people who can have a poker face, but there's no such thing as a poker body. Your body will be transmitting at all times what it feels, what it thinks, what it intends. And we do this in real time. That's the beauty of tells. We don't experience something now and then our bodies reveal it or how we feel about it 30 minutes later. We experience it now, we transmit it now. Now, the fact that it's not in the face doesn't mean it's not in the feet or the legs or the hands. So one of the things that we want to do right up front is to learn to conceal information, to constrain what we reveal, because you're reading people, but they're also reading you. And one of the easiest ways that we can do this, and I know a lot of pros disagree with me, but then a lot of pros actually do agree with me, is that you want to look at your cards. You want to look at your whole cards out of sequence, not in sequence. Because you see, if you look at your cards in sequence, you're guaranteeing that everybody will observe your tells at that moment. And you don't know what your tells are. You don't have a mirror in front of you. And some people reveal quite a bit. Some of them squint, some of them scratch, some of them massage their hair. But you see, to the careful observer, this all means something. So first and foremost, we want to protect ourselves. We want to protect our bankroll. So one of the things that you can do is begin to observe other people, but then limit their observations of you. And one of the things that you can easily do is look at your whole cards out of sequence, and I think this will help you. The other thing you have to think about is that sometimes emotions will get to us. We've all had situations where we lose the car keys. We don't know where they're at. We're so frazzled by something, we're so agitated, we're so upset that we think we've lost the car keys. And yet, if we were calm, if we were not emotionally charged, we'd know exactly where they are. This can happen to you in poker. And if you are stressed, if you're put on tilt, this is going to affect your ability to observe. It's going to affect your ability to think. It's going to affect your ability to remember. So you want to think about your emotions and keep them in check. Don't allow emotions, don't allow people to put you on tilt, because the minute you do, the minute that you're on tilt, you're going to forget what to do next. You're not going to be a very careful observer. And the fact of the matter is, you're not going to be a very good poker player, which is why they say, don't be on tilt. Hi, I'm Joe Navarro, and I want to talk to you now about comfort and discomfort and how we see it in poker. As I've said in other occasions, we reveal to each other how we feel, what we are thinking, what we intend. And we reveal things through our comfort and discomfort displays. Now, I'm sure you can look and see some people talking together, and you can easily tell if they're comfortable around each other. Or maybe there's a certain degree of discomfort. In poker, it's a little bit more nuanced. But we know this, that the minute a poker player looks at his cards, he begins to reveal, or she begins to reveal, whether they're comfortable or uncomfortable with what they have. As they look at the community cards, the same thing continues. Comfort, discomfort. And so as we study poker tells, as we expand our knowledge of reading people, I want you to always ask yourself, am I seeing displays, am I seeing tells of comfort and discomfort? And we're going to go into detail as to what these are, but always ask yourself, do I see comfort or discomfort? And here's why. In poker, the players will see themselves as either weak, marginal, or strong. So a player looks at his cards and he may think to himself, well, I'm really kind of marginal here. It could go this way or that way, or I'm weak. Or the flop comes around and all of a sudden the player sees himself or herself as strong, marginal, marginally strong, somewhere up there. So 2/3 of the time, we reveal to ourselves and to each other, subconsciously, whether or not we feel weak, marginal, or strong. And when we couple that with comfort and discomfort displays, now we begin to get a better picture of what exactly it is that we're seeing. Now, we may not see it in the face. We may just see it in the hands. Or we may see it in the torso or the shoulders. But it'll be there. It's not always about the face. We have to look at the whole body, because the whole body is transmitting to us whether the person is comfortable or uncomfortable, whether or not they have confidence. Confidence is part of high comfort. Or do they have low confidence, which is part of discomfort? But it's all there. It's usually there for us to interpret. But we first have to observe it, then we have to decode it, and then we apply that knowledge to the game of poker. Hi, I'm Joe Navarro, and when it comes to poker tells, it's all about the brain. Our brain controls all of our behavior. And within our brain, we have a very primitive area known as the limbic system. And it's the limbic system that has kept us alive for millions of years. It's the limbic brain that regulates emotions. It's the limbic brain that controls our heart and controls our pupillary constriction and all the wonderful things that our body does all at once. But it's also the limbic brain that reacts to the world around us. And in poker, the limbic brain, also known as the emotional brain, is the one that's going to reveal to us how we feel about our own cards. It's the one that's going to reveal to us how we feel about the community cards and the decisions that other people make. It's the limbic brain that is the authentic brain. It doesn't know how to lie. It's the truthful brain. It's the neocortex, the new brain, that knows how to lie. But the limbic brain doesn't know how to. So when we look at our cards and we realize that we're strong, and then the flop comes around and we realize we've got a monster hand, it's the limbic brain which makes blood flow through our veins. It's the limbic brain which tells us to sit up higher. It's the limbic brain which gives us that look of confidence. It's very authentic. It's very truthful. And so one of the things that we're going to do is focus on limbic behaviors, not social behaviors like stop and it's okay and so forth. Those are social. We're going to concentrate on limbic behaviors because they're so authentic that they give us clues as to how other people feel about their situation, how other people feel about their cards, how other people feel about what they're going to do and what they intend. Hi, I'm Joe Navarro, and we're going to continue to talk about how our limbic brain reacts to the world around us, this comfort-discomfort model that we've been talking about in other lessons. Our brain, our sense, reacts to what we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we think, even what we sense around us. We react to heat. We react to people violating our space. We react to something that touches us. We react to the cards that we've been dealt. And we have to realize that the limbic brain is running like software in the background, constantly analyzing it and transmitting through our body, whether there's comfort with what we're sensing, feeling, hearing, and so forth, or discomfort. And there's many tells that are associated with both comfort and discomfort, and we'll talk about those. But one of the things that poker players need to be aware of is that the body, the brain, the senses are all constantly assessing for things. And a lot of times at the poker tables, you'll see a poker player who takes a phone call and then is acting differently, or he hears something in another table and he may be distracted, or he may get upset. Maybe there's something on television and so forth. So we can't ignore the things that we sense, feel, and hear from outside. And at the same time, we can't ignore the things that a person may be going through on the inside. For instance, we often see poker players who maybe they have a strong hand, but they have doubt. And so there's this cognitive load that takes place where there's a lot of thinking and overanalyzing and so forth. And that doesn't mean that they're weak. It just means that at that moment, they're trying to analyze very deeply what they have. So keep that in mind when we're talking about limbic behaviors and how the body and the mind interact with the world around us. Always be aware that the brain is not just focusing on the cards, it's focusing on everything around you, and that we will reveal, because of the limbic system, what we feel, what we think, what we intend. Hi, I'm Joe Navarro, and we're going to be talking about the kinds of things that you should focus on. I'm a strong believer in situational awareness. You know, the limbic brain helps us to analyze the world around us, but we have to direct our attention. We have to be aware of what's in front of us, what's to the side of us, what's behind us. We have to be aware of not just the player that's on the button, and not just the player whose turn it is to either call or raise or act. We have to be aware of everybody else at the table. Who's affected by that call? Who isn't affected? How do they react? How do they sit at the table? So I always begin by noticing where people place their hands. Record in your mind, where is it that everybody has their hands? And we'll talk about hand behaviors later. But this is a good place to start because most people don't realize where they put their hands on the table. Most people don't realize how far in those hands are, how far out. They're not paying attention to their fingers. Are the fingers together? Are they intertwined and so forth? But you, as a good observer, can begin to notice these things and build a sort of portfolio of, oh, this player, when he sits, he places his hands here. He holds his hands this way. The other thing I like to look at is how high or how low do they sit? Some players sit very low in the chair, some players sit very high. And then look for changes in that throughout the game. Are they sitting lower? Are they sitting higher? We want to look for the most immediate reactions on the part of players to anything that happens on the table. So the flop comes out. We want to look and see, well, what was the reaction of everybody at the table? Were some people elated? Were some people concerned? Were some people in a situation where they're having trouble dealing with whatever happened? You have to be mindful of this at all times. So we look for immediate behaviors, for instance, of confidence. We look for immediate behaviors of lack of confidence. We look for immediate behaviors of discomfort to reveal to us how that person really feels. Because we know this, poker players like to bluff. And overacting, acting, bluffing, all this comes into play when you have enough time to figure out what it is that you want to do. But limbic reactions are so fast, they're so quick, they're so immediate that we can rely on them because they happen before a person has time to act them out, before they have time to orchestrate them. So we want to look for those immediate reactions. We also want to look for the reactions of people to each other, the reactions of people to the cards that are dealt, and so forth. We also want to see the reactions of players to things that are heard. We want to see their reactions to things that are called out, to other activities at the table. And of course, you want to be able to control your own reactions. You know, we've talked about concealing ourselves, protecting ourselves, guarding what we reveal. And so sometimes we actually have to take a moment and say, you know, be careful here that maybe you're marginally strong, maybe you think you're very strong, and something happens at the table and boy, you just leak how strong you are, how confident you are. And so you have to protect for these things. And of course, you want to be aware of what people say and how they say it. Because sometimes when we are strong, our voice reflects that we're strong. When we're weak, our voices reflect that we're weak or we lack confidence. So we want to look at everything around us. We want to look at what's immediate. We want to look for what looks confident, or we want to look for things that appear to be less confident. Hi, Joe Navarro here. And when we talk about poker tells, again, we're talking about the brain, we're talking about the limbic brain and how that brain of ours reacts to the world around us. Now, I've talked about situational awareness. I've talked about observing people. And what our brain does is really rather remarkable. When we feel good, when we're comfortable with others, we tend to mirror their behavior. We tend to do the same things that they do. So they tilt their head, we tilt their head, they nod, we nod, and so forth. But when it comes to negative things, our limbic brain evolved a wonderful system to deal with anything that's a threat. And now that could be a snake that crawls into our room, or it could be a hand that's been dealt to you that is going to hurt your bankroll. And our first reaction, our first limbic reaction to anything negative is usually the freeze response. Now, most of us have heard of the fight or flight response. Well, that's actually erroneous, because if it was truly fight or flight, we would be exhausted and bruised all the time. We evolved to freeze first so that we can, number one, assess what's the situation. And number two, so that if there's predators out there, they don't notice us. Now, obviously, you don't need to know all the details of this to play poker, but just be aware that the freeze response, even though there's no big tigers out there and there's no car coming at us, still applies in poker. And how do you see it? You'll see people who hold very still when they go all in and they know they have a rag hand, when they're bluffing. We see the freeze response when you are concerned, and so you tend to bring your elbows in closer to your body. You tend to hold still. You talk less and so forth. This is a limbic response. It's millions of years old, which says restrain yourself, hold yourself. Don't allow anything to notice you, because you are most likely very weak or insecure at the moment. Our second response, beyond the freeze response, is our limbic flight response. And so we distance ourselves from the things that we think could hurt us or weaken us. And you see the distancing response, the flight response, every day. Now, in ancient times, you saw a threat, maybe a tiger or a lion, so you ran. Well, first you held still, but then if you had to, you ran. Well, most of us are in offices or we're at the poker table. We can't run. So what we do is we distance ourselves. And you see it with poker players who all of a sudden push away from the table. They don't like their cards. Or they begin to handle their cards by touching them on the edges. You often see this with people who are about to fold. They grab their cards by the edges, what I've come to call the card shuttle, in the same way that if I handed you a dirty diaper, you would hold it like this. They do the same thing. They begin to touch things more distantly. They withdraw from it. And last is the fight response. Now, obviously, we don't want to see any fighting in poker. But usually what you see in poker is very aggressive play or very aggressive behavior, name-calling, insults to other players. Well, if you're strong, you don't have to insult somebody. You don't have to call somebody ignorant or stupid or talk about how poorly they're playing. What do you care? If you're strong, you just want their chips. So we often see this fight response, which is really aggression, sometimes passive, sometimes very verbal, with players who are actually very weak. And this is part also of the limbic system. So when we look at limbic behaviors, three things that come to mind that you should always remember. And it's not just comfort and discomfort, but are we seeing a freeze response, restrained behavior? Are we seeing the flight response, distancing? Or are we seeing the fight response, which is very aggressive, very personalized behavior? Joe Navarro again, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about poker tells, and especially about the kinds of things that we do as a result of a limbic reaction. We talked previously about the freeze response and the flight response and the fight response. What's interesting is that whether we are holding very still, the freeze response, or we're in an argument, and we have the fight response sort of going. For every kind of limbic response, whether it's freeze, flight, fight, we have what's called a pacifier. And this is very interesting. This is something I introduced into the literature a few years ago. And what I found was that anytime there's any kind of stress, we do something to relieve that stress. So in college where I teach, I often see college students, they raise their hand and I don't call on them. And so rather than the hand returning immediately back, what you'll see is this: they pacify. And we pacify in all sorts of ways. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with bluffing per se. It doesn't have anything to do with, let's say, lying. It has to do with how we deal with stress, both great stress and just a little bit of stress. So at the table, you'll see things like lip licking, right? That relieves stress. You'll see men who have beards stroking their beard or touching their face. Any sort of self-touching, self-soothing relieves stress. And it can be anything. You'll see people playing with their watch or playing with a phone or something. It could be whistling. Oftentimes we talk about walking through a graveyard and whistling. This relieves stress. Exhaling with puffed cheeks. You'll see someone go, you almost hit the car in front of you. Almost universally, the next thing we do is go, this relieves stress. So playing with hair, women you'll see sometimes they'll play with hair and they'll pull their strands of hair. This is self-soothing. Or we'll take our hands and rub them across our forelegs. This releases stress. Playing with chips releases stress, as does hand wringing, hand touching, facial touching, and so forth. Now, a lot of times we'll see people playing with their chips, or their feet are constantly jiggling or bouncing up and down. And one of the things that I tell people is, look for behaviors that are repetitive. If you see a repetitive behavior, it's a soothing or pacifying behavior. And so if they do it all the time, ignore it. The only time we pay attention to those is when it goes away. So if you've got a player at the table and they're bouncing that leg and it looks like a sewing machine all the time, they're just soothing themselves. This is how they deal with this normal stress of everyday life. Or you'll see them playing with their chips. Again, this is self-soothing. Or they'll play with something at the table, a rubber band or something. Anything that's repetitive, including vacuuming, is very soothing. But when we see it stop, then it has significance. Or if we see it increase. For instance, people who chew gum, that's a pacifier. But if it increases, it's because they're under stress. So just be aware that we have limbic awareness, limbic reactions, and for these, they are always followed by pacifiers. These little things that we do every day to help us deal with life, to help us deal with stress, and that help us to soothe ourselves and calm ourselves down. Hi, I'm Joe Navarro, and I'm going to talk to you about something that maybe no one has ever revealed to you, and that is that your face, your opponent's face, is really not the most accurate part of our body. And here's why. From the time we're very young, our parents begin to tell us to conceal our behaviors. They'll say things like, don't make that face. Well, maybe it was an honest face. Maybe you went, ooh, something like that, but they tell us to correct it. Or they tell us to have a party face, party smile, to publicly display how we should feel, not how we really feel. And in fact, this is often a problem with a lot of American players who, when they play with players from, let's say, China or Japan or so forth, they say, you know, I have a difficulty reading their faces. Well, that's because in a lot of cultures, part of society is maintaining this sort of placid smile, which is great for, socially getting along, but it's not very honest as to how we really feel. And in fact, the most honest part of our body is not our face. It's actually our feet. Our feet is the most honest part of our body. And the reason for that goes back to the limbic brain. You see, the limbic brain, as I've said previously, is responsible for our emotions, but more importantly for our survival. And so our limbic brain, as it assesses the world, it doesn't have a social contract. You see, facially, we have a social contract. You smile, I smile. You say hello, I wave. But the legs don't have that social contract. You see, our legs are responsible for our survival, for keeping us up and running, walking, sprinting, and so forth. And this is why around the world, when you walk towards the edge of a building, let's say it's a 30-story building and you're coming close to the edge, your feet are very hesitant to get near that edge. You certainly see it with little children. When little children are told to kiss somebody and maybe they don't like that person, they'll stand back but they'll lean forward to kiss. You see, the feet are very honest. And the same thing happens at work. You're talking to somebody and you're face to face and your feet are facing each other. A third person comes, you might rotate at the hips to say hi. But if the feet don't move, it's because you don't want them to join you. So we look at in poker at feet to reveal to us information. And I've heard from a lot of poker players who say, well, we can't see the feet all the time. Well, that's not exactly true. You may not be able to see the foot exactly, but a lot of times, for instance, when we get what's called happy feet, when the person really gets excited and they're bouncing their leg, it'll show up in their clothing. Their clothing will vibrate, and it's a very accurate indicator that the person is really very excited. And other parts of the body are also more honest than the face. For instance, our torso, we tend to lean forward when we're interested in something. We tend to sit higher when we feel confident about something. But the face may well be the least reliable place to pick up tells for some people, because we've learned to mask, we've learned to bluff, we've learned to have, literally, a poker face. And we even have people who will cover their own faces or wear things so that you can't see the face. So I tell poker players, especially the pros that I've worked with, look at the whole body. The whole body will transmit to you how we feel, what we think, what we intend. And as far as the face, well, we can pick up a lot of information there, as you'll soon learn, but it may not be the most accurate part of the body.